Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 63 of the Former Action Guys podcast, and I'm your host, Justin Kramer. And this week I have on Dave James. He's a former Recon Marine, came in the Marine Corps in the early and mid-'80s. That's when he was working in the Recon community. We talk about some of the application of or how Recon was operating at that time. You know, he had veterans of Vietnam coming in and training them in RNS and stuff like that. So it's a pretty interesting time frame for the Recon community. But he also discusses, like, you know, he got his gold wing pinning ceremony was a pretty big deal because they actually pinned him so hard that he collapsed his left lung and damaged his heart. And we get into that and stuff like that. Unfortunately, he has some connectivity issues there at the end, so I cut the interview short. But we do get through that story, and I plan on having him come back on the podcast to finish talking about some of the stuff he did because, you know, we get into some of the work that, like, the Recon community was doing in the 80s, how some of them worked with j-soc and stuff like that, and then some of the different training he did. A really interesting conversation, really good stuff. He is now mentoring guys, I guess gals maybe too, but guys that are aspiring to be in the special operations community. He does a mentorship and training program with those to better prepare them for their time in the military. So he didn't have an opportunity to promote that. So I'm going to get the links and check the show notes for the links to his website or and the information for him. Like I said, connectivity issues kind of cut the interview shorter than we had liked, but we will have Dave back on to follow up. Enjoy the podcast, and if you have any questions, keep them in mind, maybe write them down or something like that, and I'll let everyone know next time he's coming on. That way we can answer any kind of viewer questions that are out there. If you haven't already, if you're not watching this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications button on the YouTube channel at Former Action Guys Podcast on YouTube. Make sure to leave any kind of rating you want to. Apple Podcasts, the only one that really allows you to leave reviews. So please leave reviews on Apple Podcasts. Make sure to check out my website, jkramergraphics.com. I know there's going to be a lot of Recon guys that check this out because it's one of your Recon guys. I have like the Recon flags and stuff like that on my website. We're selling them for $19.95. Those are the ones that, make people, make the group photos look even cooler. So make sure to check that out at jkramergraphics.com and hit up my Instagram at jkramergraphics or at Former Action Guys on Instagram. And enjoy the show. All right, welcome to the show. I got Dave James on the podcast today, former Recon Marine, who's still involved in the community and still involved in helping the youth that want to, aspire to become special operators to prepare themselves for that. So I appreciate you taking some time out of your day and coming on the show. And thanks to the recruiting office for giving you a spot to hang out and record.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Justin. I really appreciate this opportunity, especially when it comes to the mentoring our youth and getting the word out for anybody else that wants to, go to your local recruiter, especially the United States Marine Corps and the U.S. Navy, and become Naval Special Warfare, Reconnaissance, or MARSOC. So this is really a nice platform. I appreciate this.
Yeah, no problem, man. It's I think that's good because, I tell guys, I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the Army. Both of my grandfathers were in the military. One was in the Army and one was in the Air Force. Well, I guess they were both in the Army. My dad's dad was actually in the Army Air Corps and then became Air Force, after it switched in 1945 or whatever. But so I kind of had an idea of what I was getting into when I was joining the Marine Corps. Obviously, you don't know until you're there, and I had no Marines in my family, but I had an idea of like the military, like I kind of got it. I guess what I'm trying to say is I understood that the military owns you, for 4 years, like, and the expectation is pretty high. And I think a lot of people go into the military not realizing the lack of, individualism, that you're no longer allowed to express while on duty. Obviously when you're not working, you can do what you want to do and stuff like that. But I think that initial shock of boot camp and that like breaking down of the person and breaking them away from that, it's about me kind of mentality is a shock. I mean, it's a shock even if you know it's going to be coming because, like I said, you don't really understand it until you're there and you're experiencing, the shenanigans of boot camp. So I think what you're doing to prepare people is a good idea. And I think it's great that someone with, you sent me over kind of your resume, I guess, of some of the stuff that you've done. And we've talked a little bit prior, and knowing that you've actually gone out and done some stuff, been to some real schools, done some, like, I don't know, stuff like that. I'd rather see people like you out making programs for people that are wanting to join the military rather than someone that doesn't do. I mean, I don't know. There's a kid that's getting flamed real hard, or was a couple weeks ago on Instagram for charging Pooley $600 for a workout program that was essentially like run, push-ups, pull-ups, like to prep them for boot camp, and that's ridiculous. So I think what you're doing is probably a more legitimate kind of thing, and I appreciate that. So thank you for coming on and taking time out to do that. I'd like to start back to the beginning of why you decided to join the Marine Corps over another branch. And did you come in as infantry and then move into recon, or were you a recon contract? I'm not sure if they even had that then.
Justin, going back to the beginning. And like I mentioned, I just did a podcast with retired Sergeant Major Duke Speed, former Force Reconnaissance Marine also. And I specifically talked about my Marine Corps experience, and I didn't talk about my 3 years that I served in the U.S. Army first. Which is really, really a neat segue and a story on how I got into the United States Marine Corps.
Okay.
So, just kind of briefly to hit on the U.S. Army service and experience is that I grew up in Apple Valley, Minnesota, is where I grew up. And that's about 20 miles outside of Minneapolis. And they had one of the premier wrestling programs at Apple Valley, a wrestling team by a guy named Bill Demray. And a lot of guys probably watching this podcast or will watch this podcast will recognize that name and know that Apple Valley is on the map for its wrestling program, especially back in those years. So I wrestled at Apple Valley, and I like the way you mentioned it is spot on, Justin. Is that in our generation, from people in our family being in the military and sharing that experience and their demeanor and respect for America and so on and so forth, that was kind of inbred in us. In comparison to where it is today, some of that is kind of lost, and we'll get into that later. But sure. So yeah, I was at Apple Valley, graduated in 1981, and always knew I was going to be in one of the military branches. Had the butch haircut when I was a kid, and kind of rough, kind of a brawler little kid, and I actually chose the U.S. Army. So joined the U.S. Army as a combat engineer, went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and got orders, and I went over to Europe for 26 months in a place called Dexheim, Germany is where I went with the 12th Engineers. And how I got blessed, Justin, is to eventually join the United States Marine Corps was, as you know, in the military, when you pick up first sergeant, you can be put into whatever MOS. Yeah. Sergeant major, so on and so forth. So my first sergeant at Dexheim, Germany, as a combat engineer, was a former Green Beret. All tabbed out. He was a diver, Halo. He was God as far as we were concerned, because we were just engineers. So he came on board. So PT was a high standard. The standard of living up to being an engineer was very high, him being at the helm of the company as a first sergeant. So, and he was from Minnesota, is where he was from. So I kind of had that connection with the first sergeant. He rode a Harley Davidson to work every day, called Milwaukee Iron. He was just old school and rugged, tough, a lot of grit. And he was with 10th Special Forces Group out of Batos, Germany, for 6 years over in Europe before he even came to us. So, yeah.
That's got to be interesting for even for him to move away from like special operations and move into like a traditional unit, and then having to adjust himself. You know what I'm saying? Because his expectations, I mean, you want to say his expectations should be just as high. You know, hey, do your job, come in and do it well. But the honest reality is you can't have expectations as high for your average, soldier or Marine as you would for your special operations, guys, because it's just not. They're on a different level of like drive to get the mission done or whatever.
That's an excellent point, because I know he had to do some scaling back as his learning curve adjustment as our first sergeant, but he still brought us up, and our performance and our standard levels, and not everybody was on board with that, but they really didn't have a choice.
Yeah. So did you consider at all joining the Green Berets then? Going to SF?
Absolutely. You're tracking. So what happened is I was very motivated. I was motivated to be in the service in the first place. I was motivated.
So for those listening, we had to cut out a big piece because we were having some reception problems. Dave's resituating himself, and then we're going to talk. He was answering the question about joining the Green Berets prior to joining the Marine Corps, and that's when we got degraded comms here, if you will, and so we just make that a little better. So if you want to go back into why you decided you were making a decision to if you wanted to go in the Green Berets or not.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, when I got to Fort Hood, Texas, they were recruiting for the Rangers and Special Forces, and me and the Army personnel, we went through the requirements, the medical, the physical fitness portion, and I had passed all that. And to really be honest, at the end, I only had about a month left until I ET, and I decided not to pursue going Special Forces. So really, to be honest, at that time, had a little bit of cold feet.
Was that tough for you to make that decision to because I'm sure you told people like, hey, I think I'm going to do this, and then to kind of backpedal a little bit? I mean, that's got to be kind of a gut check or something. I don't know what you would say there. Is it a little humbling to be like, you know what, I don't think I'm ready?
Yeah, great point. Yes, at that time, I did not completely feel ready that I would accomplish it if I went for it. That was perfect. So as far as being humbled, honestly, and everybody that knows me, other than the energy is I've been blessed to be humbled, and always know that the blessing and the opportunity afforded to me, that I was very gracious to have. I've just always I've been so right. I got cold feet, and I think I felt at that time that I just wasn't prepared or ready to accomplish it.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. I mean, I've never done anything like that, but that's always been something where I can't imagine you can go into it with any sort of doubt. Like if you're walking into it with any sort of doubt, I think you've already put yourself way behind the probability of passing, because the instructors are going to bring out that little piece of doubt and amplify it and make you feel like you're not supposed to be there or something like that, and cause dudes to leave. So I'm sure people probably gave you shit for backing out of it, but at least at the same time, it's a smart decision to, for something like that, you have to be fully prepared and aware. And even guys, so like today, if you go over to like MARSOC to go be a JTAC, right? You're not even going through, the pipeline and stuff or you're not even going through like the qualifications and stuff like that. They have their own little training that they do, but they almost try to talk you out of coming over there, because they're like, look, dude, you need to be ready to be gone this much. You need to be prepared. Your family has to be prepared, and it's like, so I don't know. They're trying to make it a point to, hey, this is tough. This isn't easy. And it's going to be hard on not just you, but anyone that's within your like close circle there. And I don't think you can go into anything like that with kind of a doubt, like, oh, am I going to be able to make, so I can't, you can't fault a guy for doing that. So you had a month left. You decided to go ahead and get out of the Army then and join the civilian workforce. What did you end up doing when you got out?
When I got out, I went into some construction. I did concrete work for a while. That was a good fit for me because concrete had the same type of mentality as a U.S. Army serviceman or Marine. You know,
Hmm.
hard work with eye to eye, good solid handshake.
Yeah.
So that's what I did for that year when I was out.
It seems like a lot of guys get out and go into construction, because to me, it's very appealing. It's like you're outdoors, you're working with your hands, you're solving problems constantly, things are changing, and I think that draws in a lot of guys. Um, I to me, I did like framing and stuff before I joined for a little bit, and I would do construction again, but that's not definitely not my first choice. Going out, and I have buddies that do it, and good on them, man. Especially some of these guys that are working through all this stuff that's been happening the last couple months, getting out there and just slugging away and continuing to build stuff. I mean, it's tough work, and especially in certain areas. Like I'm in Southern California. It's in the 90s if you're not right next, right on the beach. It's freaking hot, man. It's tough. That's tough work, and I think that tough work and that just coming into your job and the constant changing of construction, you're constantly doing something different is a big draw for guys that are getting out. Were you a union dude or were you working non-union?
Non-union. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Uh,
I was
at,
non-union as well.
yeah. At that time, I did masonry work with 12-inch block. So you
Hmm.
had to be a pretty rugged individual just to be a tender for the
Yeah.
masonry guys, which they kind of thought they were Marine drill instructors anyway. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's the mentality of the new guy on a construction job like that, especially one like that where you're hauling bricks, probably not fast enough, for the dudes that are laying them down. So how long were you working in the civilian workforce before you decided like, hey, I want to go back in the military, and then why did you decide to do the Marine Corps?
yeah, because my friend Brady John Gunhus, he we're lifetime friends. We grew up together. He went in the United States Marine Corps while while I uh, while I was in the U.S. Army. He went in the Marine Corps. So
Okay.
I was, conversing with him a lot, and he was telling me about Recon and the Marine Corps, and
Hmm.
really I should have made that choice. And I really thought about it from my experience with First Sergeant Robert P. Moe's Green Beret. And that was about 6 months after I got out. I knew that I had made the wrong choice by not continuing my service because like I mentioned, my gravitational pull, and I would imagine yours too, to be in the military. You kind of know that when you're really young. There's
Yeah.
a gravitational. So yeah, about the 6 timeline, and then I was only out 1 year, and I mean barely 1 year. I immediately went to the Marine Corps recruiting office, and that staff sergeant was pretty stern, no bullshit, and he told me a little bit about Recon, and I did a little bit of research on it, and uh, I told him I committed, and and like I mentioned, about 1 year later, I was off to San Diego to Marine Corps boot camp.
Back to boot camp. That's got to be, yeah. So when I was in boot camp, I had one Navy dude who is I don't know if he was prior service or went directly from the Navy to the Marine Corps, and then I had one Army guy, and it was interesting. It's like, for those that don't know, like in the Marine Corps, if you go to another service, you don't have to go through boot camp again. You might have to go through like a little program for a couple weeks just to learn their customs and courtesies and stuff like that, but boot camp's taken care of. If you come to the Marine Corps from any other service, you have to go through the full boot camp again, and you start back, as a private, unless you get a meritorious promotion or something like that. And it was interesting seeing those guys come back, and go through round two of getting yelled at by drill instructors and stuff. Do you think? Well, do you want to? Can you kind of compare and contrast like Army boot camp compared to Marine Corps boot camp that you went through in that time frame? Because that was when? What year was this?
Then I joined the United States Marine Corps in 1985,
Okay.
and originally the U.S. Army in 1981. So, a lot of staff NCO at that time were still Vietnam veterans.
Yeah.
So it wasn't too PC, politically correct back then. It was
No,
more
for
if
sure.
you
Yeah.
needed to be tightened up or straightened up. they would physically do that for you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Army and
so
Marine Corps.
especially in the United States Marine Corps. And as soon as my regular drill instructors picked us up from the receiving drill instructors, they already knew I was prior service, and they made it a point to know that I hadn't been through and was going to become a U.S. Marine. So.
All right, so Dave, so we had to work through some comm issues. Dave moved to a spot with better signal, and so I want to get back into. I don't want to miss anything. So let's start back. You decided to leave the Army. You went into construction, and you said you were doing concrete work and stuff like that, working with those 12-inch cinder blocks for about a year. You were out for about a year, and then you decided you want to come back in the military, and went to the Marine Corps. So I guess the next question that people would probably is natural to ask is, what were the big differences that you saw between the Army boot camp and the Marine Corps boot camp? And do you think going to the Army boot camp first maybe prepared you some for Marine boot camp?
In comparison to the Marine Corps, the Marine Corps boot camp was much more strict, and they wanted a much higher standard on discipline. So, and as you know, within implementing drill, which there's so much drill in the United States Marine Corps boot camp, that is to give us the discipline and the obedience to follow whatever command and orders are put out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's funny. I think when I was I want to say I might have been on my way to MCT, or maybe I had just gotten done with MCT or something like that. But I was at an airport at a USO, and there was a couple soldiers there that were also, new. And we were talking about boot camp and stuff, and they were talking about how, they had all this machine gun training and the blah, blah, all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we do all that in MCT. That's our MCT and SOI stuff. And they're like, what the hell did you guys do for 13 weeks then? I'm like, we marched and got beat. It's like that's basically what we did for 13 weeks, and then we go on to learn how to shoot the machine guns and stuff like that, because you don't really do any weapons training other than basic firearms handling or basic handling of your rifle and stuff like that, and going to the range. But that's anybody that's shot a KD range knows that's a pretty laid back kind of. I mean, that's a relaxing day at the shooting range. Really, you're sitting down a lot of the time and stuff like that. It's not shooting machine guns and maneuvering and things like that you do follow on. So it was a surprise to them to hear that all we did was march, and we march a lot. And I'm sure that's something that's been around probably since Marine Corps boot camp has begun, is that you're going to march all the time.
Right, absolutely. And, I reflect sometimes back on my basic training, going through that. And obviously I definitely learned some stuff. And started gaining some maturity that I didn't have in my younger years. But and it did help from everything I experienced in the U.S. Army, especially with First Sergeant Robert P. Mose, Green Beret. But yes, the United States Marine Corps boot camp gave me that extra maturity and discipline level to be more of a higher professional.
Yeah. And then, so after boot camp, you go to SOI, and you had mentioned before, and that's kind of when we realized we need to reset here, that you had gone through SOI and that there was a Recon Marine from 3rd Recon Battalion there as an instructor who kind of pulled a few of you to the side, who was like, hey, good on him, man. That's the best way you can help your own community out, is by identifying, possible qualified candidates and kind of steer them in that direction to, enhance the ranks of the dude. So good on that guy for doing that. So he pulled a few of you guys to the side and was like, hey, hold back. You guys, you might be good for screening do the recon screener to see if you can even qualify to go to BRC. What did that screener entail for you?
Well, like I mentioned before, Corporal Boltres gave us the information, held us back, because at that time, they didn't run the INDOC, and they didn't have screenings like every class like they do now for March and so on and so forth. So back then, it was kind of hit and miss. Recon was much, much smaller back then. They didn't have MARSOC. They didn't have Force Recon on the West Coast, so on and so forth. So when he held us back, I constantly prepared. I was super gung-ho this time. excited to be back in the military, and I was not going to let any opportunity go by with me giving it completely my best shot and more to make it. So when Sergeant Major Daniels, 26 years in the United States Marine Corps, Recon Marine, 3 tours of Vietnam, legendary Marine, when him and the staff from 1st Recon Battalion came up for the INDOC, which they don't run INDOCs anymore, but we'll get into that later. There was 19 of us that tried and 3 of us that made it.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So the first thing we did is we did the Marine Corps PFT, the push-up, or I'm sorry, the pull-ups, the sit-ups, and the run, and then we went and did the yoke course, and then we went to the pool, we went to the deep end, because that's where Recon Marines like it in the deep, and we did the brick, we did the weapon over the head for a certain amount of time. That's where a lot of the 19 were DOR, drop on request. They were leaving the pool on that portion of the INDOC. And to be honest with you, I wasn't the greatest swimmer back then, and some of the Recon guys know that. But I just had a heart. I had a lion's heart. I wasn't going to quit. Sergeant Major Daniels on the Laurel after the physical portion of the INDOC is partially why I got selected. But then after the pool, which was completely grueling, amphibious Recon Marines, then we did the ruck march, which was a long ways until they ensured that the rest of the ones that were kind of on the bubble anyway through the INDOC were gone.
Right. Gotcha.
And then.
Gotcha. It seems like the pool is the great equalizer. You know, I've had a handful of Recon Marines come on the show, and all of them have said, like, basically the great majority of people that get dropped from BRC during all of their classes, a good majority of them came during the pool session, which is like, now, I don't know, it sounds like it was then as well, but now it's like the first week. It's like, hey, you're in the pool for the first week, and then because if you can't swim, why even take you through the rest of it? You know, because that's the Recon way. Like Cameron Langland said, he was the first Recon Marine I had on. He said, you can't drown a Recon Marine. Like, they've already been drowned too many times that it's just not possible to drown them anymore. So I guess if you can't make it to that level of comfortability in the pool, then there's no point even like getting to the ruck marches and stuff like that. When you were doing like your ruck march, what was your loadout? What were you carrying?
Well, we had low bearing gear back in those days with our water canteens. So the setup in comparison to today and what you experience is different. But we had our low bearing gear, and then we had 35 pounds in our ruck. So it wasn't anything crazy. But after everything else that we had been through, from the PFT to the obstacle course to the water portion, and then immediately right into the ruck march with 35 pounds low bearing gear, whatever water weighs on top of that is enough to let you know that you're humping something.
Yeah, for sure. So after you finished BRC,
what happened, just because all my brothers are going to be on here, and they're going to fact check, like we mentioned, everything's about vetting and being truthful and honest with pure integrity as a Marine. How it worked for me after I did the INDOC, I got orders straight to 1st Recon Battalion. That's how it went. And back in the day, it was ARC, Amphibious Reconnaissance Course. And it was almost entirely at Coronado, at NSW, Coronado, California, where Buzz is at. It was mostly there. But for me, I went to RIP, the Recon Indoctrination Program, for 5 weeks at Talaga, 64 area. Is immediately where I went when I checked in. And got my rock issued. I was a roper, so I got my sling rope, and ran everywhere and did 25 and 5 airborne scuba Recon Ranger push-ups every time a Recon Marine spotted us. And and went through really the Spartacus of RIP back in those days, because like I mentioned, Justin, there was no PC political correctness going on back then.
Yeah, it had to have been a different time having staff NCOs that, were all involved in Vietnam, or mostly involved, not all, but maybe mostly involved in Vietnam. Now, I mean, I guess kids coming in nowadays kind of understand it because a lot of the staff NCOs are, GWAT vets. They've been to Iraq, they've been to Afghanistan, even though now, a lot of those dudes are also thinning out of the ranks. But, well, I mean, what was it like working underneath those guys, knowing everyone knows Vietnam was I don't know, it would have been a crazy place to have operated and tried to conduct military operations out of, and it must have been. I don't think, in my own opinion, having been to Afghanistan, never having been to Vietnam, obviously, I can't imagine we had it any worse than those guys. I mean, I feel like that was, fighting an unseen enemy in the jungles and stuff like that. That definitely had to have an effect. And, don't get me wrong, that occurred in Afghanistan as well, shooting from tree lines and shit like that. But I don't know, just I guess the aura around the Vietnam veteran, because they're now one of our older ones, and that's like a war that was touched so many lives and so many people were involved in, and there's so many crazy things that we know that happened during Vietnam. So I guess what was it like to be underneath, these Vietnam veterans, knowing that they kind of got a shitty deal when they got home, but they still stayed in the uniform and kept going?
That's an excellent point right there to start off on. Because Sergeant Major Daniels and Digger Odell and Wheeler Baker, colonels at the battalion, 1st Recon Battalion, they never took the uniform off. They stayed through and through recon hard, and they continued, from everything that I experienced, to be very stern, recon demeanor, of the seriousness of the occupation, Recon Marine.
Yeah.
Everything they did was stellar. From like my platoon sergeant, Tom Mender, the Nuke, and the legendary Recon Marine, who was my first team leader in 1st Platoon, 1st Team, Sergeant Major Hackala. Everybody in Recon knows Sergeant Major Hackala. At that time, he was Sergeant Hackala, and he was as tough as they come. So that was the demeanor, because we were in Quonset huts. We were with the old potbelly stoves down in 64 area, Talaga, the Gomer Pile Quonset huts. And so nobody came through those castles unless you were either in headquarters or the battalion or in 0321. You did not enter. Not even the MPs came onto that camp. So with that...
Oh, really?
Yeah, exactly. So that being said, we were full on being Recon Marines down there. We didn't have 14 area main side looking down our neck at all. So.
Yeah, for sure. Back to the mentors and the guys that you had in your unit, these Vietnam veterans and stuff. Though recon was utilized a lot in Vietnam, like they did the traditional reconnaissance role. In Afghanistan, not as much. They were almost as a lot of times there were maneuver elements and stuff like that. They were part of an attachment to another unit, or there to, not an attachment, but to bolster an area that, like Sangin. They brought in recon to Sangin to work a part of Sangin because it was such a shitty area to be in. So to have guys that spent their time in Vietnam, like snooping and pooping around the jungles and stuff, like legitimate, like LRP style missions you hear about, I think LRP gets not all the credit, but they get a lot of credit for Vietnam, and you don't really hear about Marine Recon as much in the mainstream, like, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's just me because my dad was in the Army and I read those books and stuff, but, hearing about recon in Vietnam, are there any known books or anything that are out there that you can point people to that want to learn more about Vietnam era recon Marines?
Absolutely. Inside Force Recon, about
okay.
Past the FEBA line, 150 miles into the enemy territory. That is probably one of the best that I can recommend.
Okay.
And I know there's a few others. There's a corpsman that was from 3rd Recon Battalion, and I cannot think of the name of his book. I can't think of what Doc's name was. but he's pretty easy to find. You just type in Recon Doc Vietnam, and he pops right up at the top. And he's got some, incredible stories in Vietnam as a corpsman with the reconnaissance units and what they did past the feeble line, which was really amazing.
So working with these guys, like what kind of impression did it leave on you working with these guys that were, experts in that trade craft? They're the ones that shaped, like probably, I'm sure there were a ton of TTPs and SOPs that came out of these small teams operating in Vietnam behind enemy lines or, in that area. So what was the impression left on you by those gentlemen that came and taught you?
Well, I'll tell you, this is the most deepest impression that was ever made from a Vietnam vet who did 3 tours, which was Sergeant Major Daniels. So when us 3 arrived at 1st Recon Battalion after riding on the Green Weenie all the way through base down to 64 area, getting off at Talaga, we went up to get the welcome aboard speech, I guess you want to call it, from Sergeant Major Daniels. Now, what he did is all 3 of us stepped into his office, and off to his right side on the bulkhead was a picture of him holding 2 heads and standing on bodies with no heads.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That is definitely not PC. That would not be accepted today.
Absolutely.
For sure.
So just seeing that picture standing in front of the Sergeant Major, all 3 of us, was already an impression that this is no bullshit. So he had 3 SRBs sitting on his desk. He told McGuire and Mormon that they were going to Bravo Company and that I was going to be sent down to Charlie Company. Then he proceeded to let us know with his welcome aboard speech that that I love these Quonset huts, and the reason is you're going to sweat your balls off in them in the summer, you're going to freeze them off in the winter, and that's going to climatize you for the bush, because that's where you're going to be anyway. And he said, if you go down and give any of these reconnaissance Marines any shit, I hope they stuff you in a wall locker till Monday, and when they let you out to come see me, I'm going to rip your lips off. That was a welcome aboard speech.
All right. That's called empowering the NCOs or something.
That's empowering something, exactly.
Jeez, that's funny. So what was your impression when you got down to your team then? Like when you were actually like, hey guys, I'm here.
Frightened, fear, respect. Whatever you say is exactly what I'm going to do. So as soon as I got down to Charlie Company, they brought me to supply. The very first thing they issued me was a rock. They actually issued me a rock, and a pretty good sized rock. They told me that I could put an indicator on it, so I put the Jolly Roger skull and crossbones on my rock, and I had to carry that every place I went. And then they gave me a rope next. I actually, on my issue card from Supply, issued a rock, issued a rope, and then UDTs, which I couldn't wear, a dive knife, which I couldn't wear because I wasn't an 0321 yet, and some of the other, linens and stuff like that, as you know. And then it was welcome aboard.
Okay, so just to clarify, in case we missed anything, because we stopped for a minute because we were dealing with signal issues, you didn't go straight to BRC, so you went to your unit before you finished your recon training?
Yes, again, because BRC, ARC only had so many classes, so you had to fall in line, for class state.
So you jumped into your unit and started OJT and then just awaited training.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
That's how it went for me.
Man, that's an even worse thing to be on, because now you haven't even passed the test yet. So now you're just some dude like hanging around.
Exactly. So we were lower than whale sperm. We were as low as you could be.
So what did they have you do while you were there? Were you actually doing training, or did you just do a bunch of like bitch work?
We did a lot of thrashing, to be really honest with you. We did a lot of thrashing, but they took us down to the pool to prep us on the pool, up by 7th Marines, up there by San Mateo. And we ran everywhere we went. We had a rock and a rock. And they...
That's hilarious that you had a rock issued to you.
Right.
Is this a normal thing? This is the first time I've ever heard of anybody being told that, or telling me that they had a rock issued to them like that.
The Recon rock thing was a big thing. I don't exactly,
Yeah.
I can't speak for current BRC and what they do with the battalions. I don't know if that's a continued thing because of all the PC. I'm not sure. But it was a huge thing even over at 3rd and 1st Force. The rock thing was gigantic.
Do you still have your rock?
No, how it worked is that you were in RIP for 5 weeks. So basically you went to some of the classes with your platoon. You went down to the Pacific on Red Beach. You hit the surf. Actually, we did a beach week where we lived right in GP mediums and smalls, right on Red Beach, and did helo cast.
It's not a bad beach to be on.
Yeah, absolutely, beautiful piece of real estate. But we did helo casts, out of the helicopters, 30-30s back then. We did high-speed casts with SOF, the sealed delivery vehicle, boats. We did high-speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. And thrashed a lot on the beach, us ropers. And then after 5 weeks, if you knew all your knots, which at that time there was 22 knots that you needed to know, you went in front of the platoon, and if you knew your knots and you had performed to the standards and conditions of the RIP program to prepare to go down to ARC, you got to run your rock up Ball Buster. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ball Buster down at 64 area, but it's literally a mountain, and it's like devil-faced. It's super, real straight up and down, vertical, horizontal, and it's
no fun, huh?
No fun. Let's put it that way. And you have to run with your rock. So me and Mark Ford started down at Talega, ran our rocks, got about halfway up the face, and Mark was slowing down too fast, so they made us go all the way back down, start over again, run up this mountain. We finally did make it. Mark didn't quit. He pulled through. And at the top of the mountain, they have an actual rock Talega hem that you have to repeat from one of the Recon Marine instructors, and then you throw your rock down into the pile of Recon rocks.
Oh, no way.
You graduate your rock. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Have you gone back to see if all the rocks are still there?
The only rock that went and taken back out of there, all the other rocks have stayed there for ceremonial reasons. Only one rock that I know of was taken out of there, and that was for my best friend, my Force Recon brother, that died on an underwater shallow blackout, Jim the Body Burns, legendary Marine. His rock was taken out of there. It is now at the CP for First Force and for Recon Battalion at Las Flores.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. I've known a lot of Recon guys, and I've never heard of this whole rock tradition thing before. I'm going to have to hit them up and see if this is still a thing, because that's actually pretty interesting. It'd be interesting to go see the big pile of rocks, of everybody that's thrown. That's a lot of history, man. That's a lot of people, and that's knowing that you're walking the same ground as some like heroes that are in that pile. You know what I'm saying? That's, I guess that's what it's all about. And I guess that's what draws people to these specialized communities and stuff like that, because you want to be part of something bigger than yourself, and you want to know that. I mean, you think about it, like, we're talking about this rock pile now. It's 2020. You said you were there in like the mid 90s, right?
In 85.
We're discussing like, yeah, okay, even more, mid 80s. And we're discussing guys that went up there with you and dropped their rock, so they're still being talked about just for something that they did in the military. And I guess, that legend that you want to leave behind, or that whatever you want to call it, I guess that's part of it. I don't know. I think that's super cool. I think that's a really cool thing. And I think, communities that do stuff like that, I think it's, it makes it all better. It makes it worth it. it seems stupid to someone on the outside looking in. Like, yeah, you had to carry a rock. You had to carry a rock and it's thrown up there like with all the other rocks. But it's like, if you were ever, I mean, I was never in the recon community, but being in the military and being someone that's been around it, and, you know, I'm all about the tradition and stuff like that. I think something like that's super cool. So that's a cool, interesting story to have heard. So once you tossed your rock in, man, what was it after that? What was the next step?
After that, you know, because the training temple down at 1st Recon Battalion was gigantic. I mean, from going to the jungle down in Panama, 29 Palms for PLARS missions with SF, going up to Fort Lewis, Washington with the 82nd, with the 2nd Ranger Battalion. The training temple was it was huge. Plus, at that time, the MEUs were going on, and there was always a recon platoon on the MEU, on the Westpac.
Yep.
So when I was at Talaga, if I can recollect what the numbers were for Alpha Company, Bravo Company, Charlie Company, DRP, Deep Reconnaissance Platoon, I think we only had 150, maybe 175, let me take that back, 175 old 321 operators at Talaga in my era. That's pretty small.
Okay.
To try to
that
fill
is
all
small.
this mission tempo and to have platoons prepared to go on Westpac. In my first Westpac in 1988, I was in the regular recon platoon on that float on the USS Ogden, and we had the shooter platoon because the black side of the shooter platoon of the Marine Corps had just started down with Bravo Company.
What do you? So I know you had mentioned that on the list of stuff you sent me, of stuff that you had done. What do you mean by that? You said 3rd Recon Battalion, Det Bravo 1 shooter platoon, and then you put j-soc in after that. So that's a j-soc qualified unit?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When it first started in 1985 with Bravo Company, a selected, literally hand-picked selected platoon to do that, was trained by LA SWAT B team. They came down every week for an entire year to get those guys spun up.
Oh, cool.
Yep. And they were modeled after the British SAS with the balaclava, chicken vest, MP5s, tooled up MUSOC 4.5s. And that's all they did was shoot. That platoon was direct action CQB HRT guys. That's it. That's all they did. And that was the beginning in the United States Marine Corps. So just kind of to leap ahead a little bit, when I did get over to 3rd Recon Battalion, I got straight into that platoon because they had the Force Recon DAP mission as a shooters. So for 2 years, that was our only mission, was to be a shooter. And then Operation Classic Resolve, the coup attempt in Manila in '89 went down with Marcos, and they put us right into j-soc for trailers for Delta. So we were with... Yeah, correct. That's how that went.
That was my next question, I guess, because you hear about, like, some of the training and stuff that these guys do. And today, man, the recon guys that go on the MEU, at the end of that training tempo or training cycle to go on the MEU, I mean, they're all pretty finely tooled instruments at that point, for the most part. There's a lot of shooting and jumping and stuff that these guys get to do and that they maintain on their own. But how often are they actually utilized operationally, in your era, in the 80s and early 90s there? How often was this shooter platoon that you're talking about actually utilized? If you can, I don't even know what's classified or what's unclassified because I've never really, I've heard of something like this, but I've never had anybody actually sit down and discuss it with me.
Right. And I can really only speak from my own personal experience in the shooter platoon, that we were utilized for that specific coup attempt in the Philippines. As far as, because then I went to First Force, you know what, I do know a little bit of information, but I can only give you general information on that.
That's fine.
This is actually pretty neat. Second Recon Battalion, Second Force never deactivated after Vietnam. They continued on. So they were super high spun up, highly trained at a Force Recon level, and did a lot of work with SF, which was down the street of Bragg. and then we were first force was deactivated in '72 and didn't come back online till '89. So when Dick Marsenko, I don't know if you're familiar with that Navy SEAL.
Yep. I've got his book up here
there
actually on my bookshelf. I've had that since I was like a teenager.
Okay. Richard Marsenko, when he was the commander, the captain at SEAL Team 2, he got selected to put together Dev Group SEAL Team 6 before he went to Red Cell. That unit was disbanded. Tier Level 1 with Marsenko, SEAL Team 6, was disbanded because of some things that had happened within the unit. It's out there, it's in the books. That Second Force took that mission over for 2 years as shooters.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they went Tier 1 for 2 years. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, I never heard that. It's interesting you talked about how you said after Vietnam, Second Force Recon never disbanded. And so that's a question a lot of people have is what's the difference between Recon and Force Recon? And I think today it's honestly, from what I've seen, you're in the Force platoon if you're getting ready to go on the MEU and you're doing all this training. But there's no actual separate platoon. I mean, it's separate, but it's not like then there used to be a second NDOC and a second like training program you had to go through to get into the Force platoon previously?
That's correct.
Okay, so can you kind of explain, I mean, I don't know how aware you are of what's going on today. You're still plugged into the community pretty well, so I'm sure you are. So can you kind of explain the difference between how Force Recon was in general back when you first came in compared to how it is now?
Absolutely. At Recon Battalion, because the meat and potatoes of battalion level is patrolling. You're in the bush. You're the eyes and ears for the infantry commanders and for the MEU commanders, what's on the ground. So a lot of patrolling. So then when I arrived at First Force, you're very correct. You take another NDOC. I got orders from 3rd. You take another NDOC. You get into whatever specific platoon you're going to get into. And for me, and then we can kind of catch on this later, but when I arrived at First Force after leaving 3rd, I had a pneumothorax, a collapsed left lung at my gold wing ceremony. 26 gold wingers collapsed my left lung out in the Philippines. So when I arrived and I was still healing, I arrived at First Force. They already knew about my pneumothorax. All of the recon community did know about it. And I got immediately put into 7th Platoon, which was getting a workup for deployment with the MEU, with the next MEU, Westpac going out. And I was still recovering from such a traumatic gold wing ceremony. I was not at 100%. I really wasn't. So I talked to Staff Sergeant Gibbons of 7th Platoon. He knew all about the pneumothorax. I said, I want to continue to be in the platoon, but, I still got to heal up from this. And he said, absolutely. Yeah. So what happened is I went down to the dive locker with Staff Sergeant McLeod of the clan of the McLeod, an incredible staff NCO, and I actually stayed down there for my next 2.5 years.
Okay.
So we supported all the dives, all the water jumps, anything amphibious out the ocean.
I want to get back and talk about what you were talking about, your injury with the gold wing ceremony, but I do want to kind of stick with the Recon versus Force Recon for just a second longer. Just so, what kind of training differences did you have when you were there? Okay, just to kind of, if you want to just kind of explain what would be the difference if you're explaining this to someone who's never even heard of it before, what's the difference between a Recon Marine and a Force Recon Marine in your era?
The Force era back when I was in there was they had more of a bigger trade skill. I mean, all of them were Halo. They were all R5 divers, and when you go to Force Recon, you go further past the FIBA line, so you go up to 150 miles behind the enemy lines as a Force Recon Marine. And then they're all shooters. They all go through the shooting package. There's just way more trade skill. And then at that time, we did a lot of work with the SEAL teams. Obviously, even at battalion, you go on full, you got a SEAL team. I had SEAL Team 1. But at First Force at that time, doctrine was pretty similar to how the SEALs were operating, because Force Recon had those assets of insert, extract, like the SEALs, and we're shooters like the SEALs, and just a lot of similarities, and a lot of missions and training alongside all the teams from Coronado. So I would say the Force Recon was really the jack of all trades and masters of all. I want to put it that way.
So basically your training just got amped up. Everything you did at Recon, you did that times 10.
Times 10 for sure. And then you directly, because you work for the division and you work for the MEF directly, where a battalion works for the battalion commander, battalion level, and we work for the division.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So now I'd like to jump back to where you were talking about. For those that don't know, so you were in the 80s. That was obviously a huge time for, I mean, people still do it, but let's be honest. When you get your gold wings, once you finish jump school down at Fort Benning, you come back to your unit, and then there's a set of jumps that you have to do to move away from the lead sled, your basic parachutist badge, to your gold wing jump wings. And what were the requirements? It was like, I know they've changed now than compared to what they were then. You guys had to do like water jumps and stuff then, correct?
You had to do water jump, a night jump, a combat full loaded jump. You had to do a fixed wing helicopter. So there was like 5 prerequisite jumps that you had to have in your jump log before, and you had to be in a paid billet, obviously, to get your gold wings.
Yeah. So, and then once guys earn their gold wings, and they have the gold, the pinning ceremony, and that's where everybody's heard of, where you see the dudes like punching the pins in their chest, and then like. Yeah, I guess as it got crazier, dudes are hitting each other with hitting helmets, hammer it in with helmets and other stuff. And then obviously that famous video came out. I think CNN might have brought it out, or ABC Dateline, or something. Yeah. One of those news agencies. Yeah, Dateline, that's what it was. Dateline had an investigative video and had a video from one of those ceremonies showing all the dudes standing in their white T-shirts and getting hit in the chest and the blood running down. So similar thing happened to you, obviously way more extreme. You kind of talked about it already, where you had a punctured lung from it. From, you said 20, what'd you say, 25 Recon Marines?
Spotted my gold wings in you. But,
yeah, and what was going through your mind at the time, like when this is all happening, like you're getting hit, you're like, this is part of it,
Well, before I share that story, I just want to say that the love for my community, the love for the Marine Corps, and love for tradition is unmatched. And for my Recon brothers and every one of them that was there within the ceremony. But reflecting back on my gold wing ceremony and how it changed me, psychologically, on just being prepared as a Recon Marine, and being a mentor today for the youth, and how I look at hazing in comparison to training has really been a great asset and a tool for me in the mentoring program, because I personally went through a pneumothorax collapsed left lung at my gold wing ceremony, which just went too far.
That's crazy, man.
So yeah, because I was at the pipeline at Fort Bragg going through the SF courses. So I went through Nick Rose POW SF SEER course. I went through Sephardic with Delta, and Recon Marines will know what that is. I went through Sephardic, and then I went to SF Breacher course and a couple other courses. But I did my gold wing jump with the 82nd on a mass tack at Fort Bragg. So when I flew back to 3rd Recon Battalion, which was down preparing for the coup attempt in the Philippines in the upper MEF camp of Subic, I got in on a Friday. They told me Saturday to be on 100% rock. I needed 3 sets of gold wings, a white T-shirt like you mentioned. I needed an old steel pot from Vietnam era, and I was going to get my gold wings up on top of the roof. So I got down there, and they were already drinking and indulging in getting their testosterone up with alcohol. And I put my white T-shirt on. They took the gold wings. They sanded the little tongs on the back for the turtles to go on, as you know, for your uniform. They sanded them down on the concrete so they could hear the pop in the flesh. Each Marine gets to grind the wings in, put the wings in, grind them, bite your nipples, so on and so forth, all that craziness. And then they each get one hit. And then they shake your hand, congratulate you, and then you go through all the rest of the gold wingers. So the fifth gold winger that came up to me was my platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Scary Berry, and other Marines will contest to this. He's about 6'2", 250 pounds, big bellowing voice, ran all the pre-scubas. They called him Scary Ron Berry. He hit me in talking about rocks again in Recon. He washed the wings in. The pectoral was all, my muscles were all grinded up, no muscle tone left. They were just kind of hanging there. And he would put the wings in. They weren't level to him, so he pulled them back out. They hit the pavement. Ting, ting, ting. He picked them back up just then. He put them back in, and he took a rock that another Marine had given him, put it over his head. He's 6'2", 250.
Fuck.
Yes, correct. And he pounded it directly into my gold wings, into my pectoral. And I weakened at the knee.
Damn, man.
My legs went rubber, and I almost dropped on the fifth on Staff Sergeant Berry. I almost dropped. I didn't. I pulled deep down into my Marine grit, esprit de corps, wherever, right into my soul, Justin. And I grabbed his hand. He went to shake my hand, and I literally, I mean this with pure integrity, I sucked the energy right out of him, because as I wouldn't let his hand go until I had regained my strength not to pass out or drop on the ground, which I did, and I went through all the rest of the remaining 26 Reconnaissance Marines. And
that's insane,
it.
dude.
I survived it. My lung didn't survive it, and it actually it tore a hole in my protective sac of my heart. And
that's crazy.
And then, as you know, which you've heard about gold wing ceremonies, then they have you drink and you sing gold wing ceremony songs, and then out of the steel pot, you drink the alcohol, and then you have to pound. I had 54 jumps at the time. I actually had to pound the steel pot into my left pec, into the gold wings 54 more times on top of everything else I'd been through. So I take a little bit of responsibility of the tradition and what I did to pound them in. And with the nickname Rage, I did everything with, high
full intensity,
intensity.
Did you see in that era, man? Well, that's crazy, dude. First off, that's just, it's unfortunate because it's something like that's like a good time, and it could be a good tradition, just kind of gets overblown. And I talk about it 2 episodes ago when I was talking with my buddy Nick Davison. We were mechanics together because I initially came in as motor T and I lap moved after like 3 years. We were talking about it. I got promoted to corporal, and then obviously, I got my blood stripes. I got my legs beat up, and then the next day we had an NCO run with the sergeant major or something like that. So I was all fucked up. Well, then the following month, my buddy got promoted to corporal, and I'm like, all right, I get to give someone their blood stripes, because it's a thing. You're like, all right, I'm in the club now. And I remember kneeing my buddy in the leg, and he went completely pale and almost passed out. And I sat him down, he sat down, and I'm like, dude, what the fuck? And I never did it after that. You know what I'm saying? After that, I was like, this dude literally, completely turned white and almost passed out just because I kneed him in the leg, pretty hard. I mean, let's be honest, I did it pretty hard. And I was just like, you know what? This isn't worth, because this was in 2009. So at that point, obviously nothing like that's acceptable. If someone walked in and seen him almost passed out and laying on the ground right after he got promoted, I would have been in so much trouble. And I was like, you know what? This isn't worth my career, and I think it's fucked up that I'm hurting this dude. I don't, you want to keep the tradition going. You want to knee your buddy. just don't be overzealous about it, I guess, because that's, I think, maybe, I don't know. After doing that, I just saw, I didn't see it as being as cool as I thought, because I was like, I just fucked him up and that wasn't cool. So I know what you're saying, when people kind of overdo it, not to that point though, not where you're like piercing someone's heart, and almost killing them. Did you see, was this like did this seem like a common occurrence in your time? Like, did you see other injuries similar to yours in that time frame?
I didn't personally witness other injuries, but I know of reconnaissance Marines that shared their injuries of the going experience with me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's, man, it's just like I was saying, it's just crazy, it's just, it's unfortunate. And good thing that you made it through it and that it didn't, I don't know if it permanently damaged you, like if you still have like residual effects from that.
What happened was, so the next morning when I woke up, because obviously I got drunk, I don't remember getting back to the barracks, but my brothers, they made sure that I got back to the upper meth camp, to the Quonset, and I woke up in the morning, and literally in my left pec had no muscle tone, solid pin marks, and I got up and
your chest was tenderized.
It was tenderized for sure, yeah. And so I was in a Quonset with the other reconnaissance Marines in there, and I had made a mention because when I sat up in the rack, I couldn't breathe. I had like this crackling in my chest. And I was like, wow, I can't breathe. And I mentioned to one of the other go-wingers who was there, I said, hey, I can't breathe. I don't know what's wrong. And they're like, suck it up, Rage. So go wing somebody. What do you expect?
Yeah.
How do you think you're going to feel? It's like, yep, roger that, suck it up. So for 3 days, I was on one lung. And I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly. So for 3 days, I conducted myself as a Recon Marine, doing all the activities of that day, PT, everything, on one lung. So the third day, I went up to the corpsman who was at the going ceremony. I said, hey, Doc, there's something wrong inside. Something's shutting off. I feel like I'm dying inside. And he's like, Rage, that's the most brutal going ceremony I've ever seen. We need to get x-rays. So at that time, everybody knew in the Marine Corps the level of tradition was borderline, if not hazing. So he's like, we can't go down and tell him that you were at a go wing ceremony. Let's kind of tell him you were doing something else and something happened. But we were playing pretty naive because we went to the upper mess camp, to the Naval BAS, the hospital, and the techs, they took x-rays, and they told me and the corpsman to sit outside the x-ray room. They went down to the flight surgeon. They came back, picked us up, walked into the flight surgeon, Justin. The flight surgeon was so upset he wasn't even sitting at his desk. He was standing and he looked at me and the corpsman. I was a corporal at the time. He said, Corporal James, let me put this in terms for you to completely understand. You don't jump out of an aircraft without a parachute. You don't scuba dive in the ocean without scuba tanks. You do not sustain life without your lungs. He took one of the x-rays, he put it up in the light box, and just back in those days, obviously I was intelligent, but I was a knuckle-dragging Nathandrol Recon Marine, and now I was awoken. I looked at that light box. None of my Biancaros, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, were completely gone on my left side, but the scary part is he showed me my heart, and the protective sac around the heart was ripped open, and 1/4 of my heart had blood pushed against it. He told me he believed they were hitting me so hard that they were stopping my heart.
Fuck, dude. That's crazy, man. That's insane.
So
you're lucky, and I guess they're lucky, too. You didn't die right there,
I didn't die,
What are you? So are you still dealing with effects from that?
Yes and no. I mean, it's a delicate thing. It's a delicate thing. I love my Recon brothers, and for me, even speaking about it now on this podcast, but I think it's something important. Hold on one second, Justin. I'm gonna make sure my phone is plugged in so I can continue juice here.
Oh, you're good. Go ahead.
I think I'm plugged in properly.
Yeah. No, while you're doing that, I was just gonna that's just it's tough, man. And I know what you're saying. I don't see this. You're not disparaging anyone or your community or anything like that. You're just making it aware. I think that's important. I think the importance of making people aware of what their actions can do, because as a 19, 20-year-old kid, you don't really understand the effects of that. But someone that's been in the recon community for 15, 20 years, I've probably seen some gold wing ceremonies that, were like questionable or maybe crossed the line. So they can better understand the negatives of like slamming someone in the chest, 26 times or whatever, however many times, and fucking them up like that. Whereas when you're 19 or 20, you're new to the Marine Corps and stuff like that, you're not going to realize the damage that could occur. And you're all invincible, right? You're all a bunch of, new recon Marines that are invincible, and sorry, my audio settings keep changing on their own. There he goes. And so I know where you're kind of going with this. I don't see this as disparaging your community at all, but I do see it as bringing awareness to people that are out there of why some people look down upon not the tradition, but the overzealous application of the tradition. You know what I'm saying?
That perfectly said. Absolutely, Justin. Beautifully said. You nailed it. Absolutely. I mean, for me, at that moment, he put the X-ray in the light box was a real mature grow-up level for me. Taking a broader look at what we do in the unit, what Recon does across the board, to just be better professionals. That was a grow-up period for me because, obviously now I'm damaged as a Recon Marine, mentally and physically. It was a hell of a beating, and.
Well, yeah, I mean, to the point where you missed a deployment because of it. You know what I'm saying? And how is that being good stewards of taxpayer money when you're taking a guy and giving him $1 million worth of training and then, poking a pin into his chest until he can no longer breathe? Like that. Like what was your point and purpose of being there other than being a dummy to hit up on? You know what I'm saying? Like it makes no sense to put you through all that and then have you sidelined because of something, as juvenile as slamming. And don't get me wrong, again, I'm with you. I think it's a tradition that you guys do, that gold wingers do, and it's something I never did and I can never fully understand. But it's the overzealous application, and there's always that guy that just kind of wants to take it too far. And I think you talking about it is a positive thing for everyone that's going to hear it and share that story. That's crazy. And this was, 5 or 6 years before the whole thing came out on Dateline,
That's
right?
Correct.
Before it became known that this was a thing.
That's absolutely correct. I actually saw that Dateline. But no, absolutely. And the thing for me is now, because everybody knows how much I love being a Recon Marine, a Marine. I was in, and you can't even put it on a percentage because I was all in. And it takes all you got, to get to that level. And when I got to First Force, I mean, I did a lot of thinking about, the community and training and things that we do. And it really did bring me to a higher level of being a better Marine when I got to First Force. Because even though I went through such a horrific thing and there was the mental confusion on what happened and how traumatic it was, I actually became a better Marine. I was more focused on being more mature and more professional at First Force for sure.
What was the reaction of your command after, the flight surgeon seen you and showed you the injuries that you sustained?
I'm glad you asked that. What happened then is Big Duke 6, Lieutenant Colonel Forrester, phenomenal Vietnam veteran with third Force, leader of leaders, a Marine's Marine. I want that to be known first. At 3rd Recon Battalion, he got us airborne ranger seats to get the tab. Just phenomenal commander. He flew. He got on an aircraft. He flew to the Philippines, the Upper Meth Camp, and he gave us a tongue lashing. He gave us the insight of where it started in Vietnam and how, unfortunately, with the testosterone in recon, alcohol put on top of it, on where it's gone and what happened in my gold wing ceremony. And then he did give a bad fit rep to the staff NCO in charge, and swept it under the carpeting, which I didn't want to go any further. I mean, that's where I let it lie. In fact, Justin, I couldn't even go to the BAS after Lieutenant Colonel Forster came down and reprimanded the staff sergeant and gave us that tongue lashing. I could never go to the BAS to see if I was even healing up, or how it was going.
Were you directed to not go, or did you just not want to go because you didn't want to bring more attention to the problem?
To be honest. Both.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't. I was like, you know what? I don't want this to be against my unit and the recon community, but my God, I'm dying here. I mean,
yeah. Hold on just a second. I'm starting to lose you, I think.
My